Right now, millions of Americans are making Social Security decisions that quietly reduce their income for life, not because they chose wrong on purpose, but because they didn't understand one simple rule about working while collecting benefits. This matters to your wallet because earning just a little too much, or filing at the wrong age, can trigger permanent cuts or withheld checks. Stay with me, because understanding this now can protect thousands of dollars you've already earned. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments. And I will give you a heart. If you want to collect Social Security retirement benefits while you are still working, the most important thing to understand right from the start is that the rules are not designed to punish work, but they are designed to control timing. And misunderstanding that timing is where people lose real money. This video is not about Social Security Disability or SSI because those programs follow completely different income rules, and confusing them is one of the fastest ways people end up with wrong advice. We are strictly talking about retirement benefits that you qualify for after earning at least 40 work credits, which is roughly 10 years of work where you paid FICA taxes into the system. Once you reach age 62, Social Security allows you to claim retirement benefits, but claiming early and continuing to work triggers what is called the earnings test. And that earnings test is the single biggest source of confusion and frustration for people trying to supplement income while staying active in the workforce. To understand why this matters to your wallet, you need to separate three concepts that most people lump together incorrectly: your claiming age, your full retirement age, and the earnings limit. Claiming age is simply when you decide to start benefits, anywhere between 62 and 70. Full retirement age is a specific age set by law based on your birth year, and for anyone born in 1960 or later, full retirement age is 67. The earnings limit only applies if you claim benefits before reaching your full retirement age, and once you hit full retirement age, the earnings limit disappears entirely. That one sentence alone changes how a lot of people should think about working and Social Security, because it means the rules are temporary, not permanent. Before full retirement age, Social Security limits how much you can earn from work without affecting your benefits, and after full retirement age, you can earn unlimited income with no benefit reduction at all. The confusion begins because many people hear the word penalty and assume the money is lost forever, which is not actually how the system works. The earnings test works by temporarily withholding benefits if you earn above a certain threshold, not by permanently reducing your benefit amount the way early claiming does. In practical terms, that means Social Security may stop sending you checks for part of the year if your earnings are high enough, but those withheld months are later credited back to you in the form of a higher monthly benefit once you reach full retirement age. That distinction matters because it changes the conversation from fear to strategy. Now let's talk about the actual earnings limits, because this is where dollars and cents come into play. Each year, Social Security sets two earnings thresholds, one for people who are below full retirement age for the entire year, and a higher one for the year in which you reach full retirement age. For recent years, the lower threshold has been a little over $21,000, and the higher threshold in the year you reach full retirement age has been over $56,000, with these numbers adjusting slightly each year for inflation. If you claim benefits early and earn more than the lower threshold, Social Security withholds $1 in benefits for every $2 you earn above the limit. In the year you reach full retirement age, the rule becomes less strict, and Social Security withholds $1 for every $3 you earn above the higher threshold, and once the month of your full retirement age arrives, the earnings test stops completely. This structure tells you something important about how Social Security views work. They are not trying to stop you from working, they are trying to discourage people from claiming benefits early while still earning significant wages, because early claiming already locks in a permanent reduction. That permanent reduction is a separate issue from the earnings test, and mixing them up leads to bad decisions. When you claim at 62, your base benefit is permanently reduced by about 30% compared to waiting until full retirement age, and that reduction lasts for life. That reduction applies regardless of whether you work or not. The earnings test does not reduce your base benefit permanently, it only delays payments temporarily if your wages are high. This means someone who claims at 62 and earns well above the earnings limit could see most or all of their checks withheld, while also locking in a permanently reduced benefit, which is why in many cases claiming early while continuing to work full-time makes little financial sense. This is not a blanket rule, but it is a very common outcome. Another key point that affects household income is what counts as earnings for Social Security purposes. Only wages from employment reported on a W-2 and net earnings from self-employment count toward the earnings limit. Investment income does not count. That includes dividends, interest, capital gains, pension income, IRA distributions, annuity payments, rental income, and withdrawals from retirement accounts. This distinction opens up planning opportunities that many people overlook. Someone who stops working but lives on investments can collect Social Security early without worrying about the earnings test, while someone earning wages from even part-time work could trigger benefit withholding. This is why two people with the same total income can have completely different Social Security outcomes. Social Security only cares about earned income from work, not total cash flow. This also answers a very common question about married couples. The earnings test is applied individually, not jointly. If one spouse claims Social Security early and does not work, but the other spouse continues working and earns a high income, the working spouse's wages do not affect the non-working spouse's Social Security benefits. Social Security looks at the earnings of the person receiving the benefit, not the household. However, if a spouse is receiving spousal benefits based on the worker's record, and the worker claims early and exceeds the earnings limit, then both the worker benefit and the spousal benefit can be affected because they are tied to the same earnings record. This is where couples need to be especially careful, because a decision by one spouse can ripple through the household income if spousal benefits are involved. Divorced spouse benefits follow a different rule, and the earnings of the ex-spouse never affect the divorced spouse benefit, which is another area where people often receive incorrect advice. Understanding these distinctions is not about gaming the system, it is about avoiding unintentional mistakes that reduce income. Another issue that directly affects your wallet is how Social Security enforces the earnings test. Benefits are not reduced dollar by dollar in real time. Instead, Social Security estimates your earnings for the year and withholds full monthly checks until the required amount has been withheld. This often surprises people who expect a smaller check and instead see checks stop entirely for several months. For example, if Social Security determines that you owe 4 months of withheld benefits due to excess earnings, they may simply not send checks for 4 months. This can feel alarming if you are not prepared, but it does not mean your benefits are gone. It means Social Security is applying the earnings test mechanically. If your actual earnings end up lower than estimated, Social Security adjusts and may repay some benefits later. If your earnings end up higher, they may withhold additional months in the future. This is why reporting earnings accurately and updating estimates matters. If you do not report earnings and Social Security later discovers excess income through your tax return, you could face benefit withholding months or even years later, which disrupts cash flow when you least expect it. This is not punishment, it is delayed enforcement, but it feels the same if you are relying on that income. All of this leads to the central financial question people ask: should I claim Social Security early if I am still working? The honest answer is that it depends, but in many cases, claiming early while earning above the earnings limit produces the worst of both worlds, a permanently reduced benefit and temporarily withheld checks. For people who plan to keep working full-time or earning significant wages, delaying Social Security often results in higher lifetime income, less stress, and more predictable cash flow. On the other hand, for people who stop working, work very little, or rely on non-wage income, claiming earlier can make sense depending on health, longevity expectations, and household resources. The key is that the earnings test is not something to fear, but it is something to respect. It exists to coordinate work and benefits, and when misunderstood, it quietly drains income. In the next part, we will go deeper into real-world scenarios, including part-time work, self-employment, year of retirement strategies, and how Social Security recalculates your benefit after withheld months so you can see exactly how these rules play out in practice and how to use them to your advantage rather than letting them surprise you later. Now that you understand the basic mechanics of claiming Social Security while working, we need to move from rules into real life because this is where most people either protect their income or accidentally give it up. The earnings test sounds simple on paper, but how it plays out month to month depends heavily on timing, job structure, and how predictable your income really is. One of the most common real-world situations involves part-time work, and this is where people often assume they are safe without doing the math. Someone might say they are only working a few days a week or just filling in occasionally and assume they are well below the earnings limit, but overtime, bonuses, commissions, or seasonal spikes can push annual earnings over the threshold without warning. Social Security does not care how evenly income is spread across the year, it only looks at total earned income for the calendar year. That means someone who earns most of their income in just a few months can still trigger benefit withholding even if they stop working later in the year. This is especially important for people who retire mid-year. Many assume that once they stop working, the earnings test stops applying, but the earnings test applies to the entire calendar year unless you qualify for a special rule called the first-year rule, which allows Social Security to look at monthly earnings instead of annual earnings in your first year of retirement. This rule can be extremely valuable, but it is poorly understood and often overlooked. Under the first-year rule, if you retire mid-year and your monthly earnings after retirement fall below a certain threshold, you may still be able to collect full Social Security benefits for the months you are truly retired, even if your annual income exceeds the standard earnings limit. This is one of the few situations where careful timing can preserve benefits without violating any rules. The problem is that Social Security does not automatically apply this rule unless you ask and provide the necessary information, which means many people miss out simply because they did not know the option existed. Self-employment adds another layer of complexity because earnings are measured differently. For self-employed individuals, Social Security looks at net earnings, not gross revenue, which means legitimate business expenses reduce the income counted toward the earnings limit. This can be helpful, but it also introduces uncertainty because net earnings are often not finalized until tax time. A self-employed person may believe they are under the earnings limit, only to find out later that their net income exceeded the threshold, triggering retroactive benefit withholding. This is why conservative estimates and regular income tracking are critical for anyone self-employed who claims Social Security early. Another real-world scenario that causes confusion involves people who reduce hours but do not fully retire. For example, someone might leave a full-time job and take a consulting role, part-time position, or temporary contract. The income may feel modest compared to previous earnings, but it can still exceed the Social Security earnings limit surprisingly quickly. When this happens, people often feel frustrated because they believe they are being punished for staying productive, but what is actually happening is a mismatch between claiming age and work intensity. Social Security assumes that early claimers are transitioning out of the workforce, not continuing significant paid work. When reality does not match that assumption, the earnings test steps in. This leads to another important point: Social Security does not evaluate whether working is a good idea for your health, happiness, or sense of purpose. It only applies rules mechanically. That is why planning ahead matters more than reacting later. Another area where people get tripped up is bonuses, severance pay, and delayed compensation. These payments often show up unexpectedly or are paid after employment ends, but they still count as earned income if they are tied to work performed. This can cause problems for someone who thought they had retired cleanly and claimed Social Security, only to receive a bonus or severance payment that pushes them over the earnings limit. Social Security does not look at intent, it looks at reported earnings. Understanding how your employer structures final payments can prevent unpleasant surprises. The same issue applies to unused vacation payouts, which in some cases count as earnings and in other cases do not, depending on how they are classified and reported. This is another example of why blanket advice rarely works and why details matter. Now let's address one of the biggest misunderstandings of all: what happens to benefits that are withheld. Many people believe that once Social Security withholds benefits due to excess earnings, that money is gone forever. This belief causes unnecessary fear and leads some people to avoid working altogether when they might not need to. In reality, Social Security keeps track of the months for which benefits were withheld, and once you reach full retirement age, your benefit is recalculated to remove the early filing reduction for those months. In simple terms, if Social Security withheld 6 months of benefits because you earned too much, it is as if you claimed benefits 6 months later than you originally did. Your monthly benefit amount increases going forward to reflect that adjustment. This does not mean you get a lump sum repayment of the withheld checks, but it does mean the system partially corrects itself over time. The key word here is partially. The recalculation helps, but it does not fully erase the impact of claiming early if you worked significantly and had many months withheld. This is why relying on recalculation as a strategy is risky. It works best when only a small number of months are affected, not when benefits are withheld repeatedly over several years. Another important factor is taxation, which, while technically separate from the earnings test, interacts with work and benefits in ways that affect net income. Even if you are below the earnings limit or past full retirement age, Social Security benefits can become taxable depending on your combined income, which includes wages, investment income, and half of your Social Security benefits. This means someone who works while collecting benefits may not lose benefits to the earnings test, but could still lose part of the value through higher taxes. The result is that the check arrives, but the after-tax spending power is lower than expected. This reinforces the idea that looking only at gross benefits is misleading. What matters is how much money actually stays in your pocket. Another frequent question involves whether it ever makes sense to intentionally trigger the earnings test. In limited cases, the answer can be yes. For example, someone who claims early, works for 1 or 2 years, and has benefits withheld may later benefit from the recalculation if they stop working well before full retirement age. This can slightly increase their future benefit and may align with cash flow needs during that period. However, this strategy requires careful modeling and realistic expectations. It is not a loophole and it does not produce free money. It simply shifts timing. People who try to use it without understanding the mechanics often end up disappointed. The emotional side of this topic also matters because Social Security decisions are not purely mathematical. Many people claim early out of fear that the system will run out of money, or because they feel entitled to collect as soon as possible. Others delay because they want the highest possible benefit even if it means drawing down savings in the meantime. Working while collecting benefits often sits in the middle of these emotional pressures. People want income now, but they also want security later. The danger lies in making decisions based on headlines, anecdotes, or incomplete advice rather than a clear understanding of the rules. This is especially true when friends or coworkers share stories that are missing critical details. One person's experience does not automatically apply to another, even if the situations sound similar. The rules are consistent, but how they apply depends on timing, income sources, and claiming age. This brings us to one of the most important takeaways of this entire discussion: Social Security rules reward coordination. Coordinating work decisions with claiming decisions, coordinating household income sources, and coordinating timing across calendar years can dramatically change outcomes without breaking any rules. The earnings test is not something to fear, but it is something to plan around. Ignoring it does not make it go away, it just makes its effects unpredictable. In the final part, we will bring everything together by walking through clear decision frameworks, warning signs that claiming early while working may hurt you, situations where it may make sense, and specific steps you can take before claiming to avoid costly surprises so that your Social Security decision supports your long-term financial stability instead of quietly undermining it. Now let's bring everything together and turn these rules into practical decision-making, because knowing the rules without knowing how to apply them is exactly how people still lose money. The single most important question to ask yourself before claiming Social Security while working is not "can I," but "what will this do to my lifetime income?" That shift in thinking alone protects more money than any trick or shortcut. The first warning sign that claiming early while working may hurt you is stable or rising earned income above the earnings limit. If you are earning anywhere near the threshold and your income is unpredictable, bonuses, overtime, commissions, seasonal work, consulting projects, or last-minute contract extensions can push you over without warning. When that happens, Social Security does not negotiate, it withholds checks. If your benefit is modest and your earnings are strong, you may find yourself in a situation where you claimed early, locked in a permanent reduction, and then receive little or no benefit for months or even an entire year. That is not strategy, that is leakage. Another red flag is claiming early out of fear rather than necessity. Many people worry that Social Security will be reduced in the future, so they rush to claim as soon as they turn 62 while continuing to work. What often gets missed is that claiming early does not protect you from future changes as much as people think, but it does guarantee a permanent reduction under current law. Delaying, even by a few years, increases your monthly benefit for life, and those increases are inflation adjusted. For people with decent health and average or above average life expectancy, that higher base benefit compounds quietly over decades. Working while delaying can actually strengthen your position by preserving savings and increasing future guaranteed income at the same time. Another situation that deserves careful thought is household coordination. If you are married, divorced, or widowed, your claiming decision affects more than just your own check. Spousal and survivor benefits are directly tied to claiming age and benefit amounts. Claiming early while working may reduce not only your own benefit but also the benefit your spouse or survivor may later rely on. This is especially important for higher-earning spouses, because their claiming decision often sets the ceiling for household benefits. A decision that feels manageable today can echo for decades in a surviving spouse's income. This is one of the most overlooked wallet impacts of early claiming combined with work. On the other hand, there are situations where working while collecting benefits can make sense, and pretending otherwise would be misleading. One example is someone who has fully transitioned out of full-time work and only earns small, predictable amounts well below the earnings limit. In that case, claiming early may provide useful income without triggering penalties, especially if the person has limited savings or needs cash flow to avoid debt. Another example involves someone who retires mid-year and uses the first-year rule correctly, allowing them to collect benefits during true retirement months even if their annual earnings were high earlier in the year. This requires careful documentation and communication with Social Security, but when done correctly, it can preserve benefits that would otherwise be withheld. There are also cases where health considerations outweigh mathematical optimization. If someone has a shorter life expectancy or serious health concerns, claiming earlier while still working part-time may provide meaningful income during years that matter most to them. Social Security planning should never ignore human reality, but it should be informed by it, not driven by assumptions or fear. Another crucial step before claiming is understanding how Social Security communicates and enforces these rules. Social Security does not automatically know your future earnings. They rely on estimates you provide and data reported by employers and the IRS. If your earnings change during the year and you do not update Social Security, they will continue paying benefits based on outdated information. This is how overpayments happen. When Social Security later reconciles your earnings, they will recover overpayments by withholding future checks. This recovery process is often abrupt and confusing for beneficiaries, which is why proactive reporting matters. Keeping Social Security informed of changes in work status or income is not optional if you want to avoid disruption. Another practical safeguard is separating retirement income sources in your planning. Because only earned income counts toward the earnings test, shifting cash flow toward pensions, retirement account withdrawals, annuities, or investment income can reduce the risk of benefit withholding. This is not about gaming the system, it is about aligning income sources with the rules as they exist. Someone who understands this distinction can often maintain lifestyle income without triggering penalties simply by choosing where the money comes from. This is one of the clearest examples of how planning protects your wallet without requiring sacrifice. It is also important to understand that the earnings test is temporary, but claiming age is permanent. Once you reach full retirement age, the earnings test disappears forever. At that point, Social Security recalculates your benefit to account for months withheld, and you are free to work and earn without penalty. This makes full retirement age a powerful milestone. Many people underestimate its importance and focus only on age 62 or age 70, but full retirement age is where flexibility returns. Decisions made before that point should be evaluated based on whether they help or hinder you in reaching that milestone with the strongest possible benefit. A useful framework for decision-making is this: if you plan to keep working and earning above the limit, delaying Social Security usually makes sense. If you plan to stop working or earn modest predictable income, claiming earlier may be reasonable, and if your situation is in between, timing and coordination matter more than the headline age. No single age is universally best. What is universally costly is making the decision without understanding how work income interacts with benefits. Another often missed issue is emotional spending. When people claim Social Security early and see checks coming in, they sometimes adjust spending upward, assuming the income is stable. When benefits are later withheld due to earnings, the shock is not just financial but psychological. This can lead to debt or forced withdrawals from savings. Avoiding this cycle requires treating early benefits as conditional when you are still working, not guaranteed. That mindset alone can prevent financial stress. Finally, the most practical advice is also the simplest: do not treat Social Security as an isolated decision. It is part of your broader retirement income system. Working, claiming, saving, investing, and spending are all connected. Optimizing one piece while ignoring the others rarely produces the best outcome. When people feel disappointed with Social Security, it is often not because the system failed them, but because they were never shown how the pieces fit together. Understanding the earnings test, claiming ages, and recalculation rules gives you leverage. It allows you to choose timing intentionally instead of reacting later. The goal is not to squeeze every last dollar out of the system, but to avoid unnecessary losses and create stable, predictable income that supports your life. When you understand these rules clearly, Social Security stops feeling like a trap and starts functioning like what it was designed to be, a foundation you can build on without fear, confusion, or regret.